Sarah Belle Reid, and today I'm going to be talking about the new Make Noise module, Spectraphon. Special thanks to Make Noise for sending me an early unit to check out and for asking me to share my explorations with all of you. Spectraphon is a complex oscillator for Eurorack modular systems that was designed in collaboration with Tom Erb from SoundHack using a new DSP platform developed by Jeff Snyder of Snyder Phonics. It's unique from other complex oscillators because instead of using wave shapers to alter its sound, Spectraphon instead analyzes and resynthesizes characteristics of other sounds. You can treat it like a dual oscillator or more like an effect processor, in which case it produces vocoder, resonator, spectral blurring type effects, all which sound really, really cool. So in this video, I'll start off with a quick conceptual introduction to Spectraphon, including how the Fourier theorem, additive synthesis, and resynthesis factor into its design. Then I'll give you a tour of the module and everything that's included and discuss how it all works. And finally, I'll share a bunch of different patch examples and demos of the Spectraphon in a musical context along with other instruments. If you'd like to get a Spectraphon for yourself, there is an affiliate link in the description of this video that you can use. Anything that you purchase with that link helps out my channel, so thank you. Like all of the other Make Noise and SoundHack collabs, the Spectraphon encapsulates a number of complex digital synthesis concepts that are uncommon in hardware designs. Specifically, Spectraphon explores additive synthesis and resynthesis in a form factor that's very similar to a Buchla-style complex oscillator. In fact, Make Noise has indicated that 3 particular Buchla devices were directly inspirational to the Spectraphon's design. Namely, the 259 Programmable Complex Waveform Generator, the 296 Programmable Spectral Processor, and the Touché, a hybrid keyboard instrument that was developed in collaboration between Don Buchla and David Rosenboom. Unlike many contemporary instrument designs in the 1970s, which gave users access to a fairly fixed set of waveforms or timbres, each of these devices presents a really unique way of continuously altering the timbre of a sound. Explaining how Spectraphon relates to all of these instruments is a really big topic that could easily be a video unto itself. But for now, the important takeaway is that, like these other devices, Spectraphon has its own unique way of continuously altering the character of sound. Now, in order to understand how Spectraphon works, we first need to unpack a few additional concepts, starting with the Fourier theorem. The Fourier theorem states that, essentially, any tone with a relatively constant pitch can be represented by a series of sine waves that are tuned to specific frequencies and specific amplitudes. When combined together, all of these sine waves, which may be referred to as partials, define a sound's waveform. So, as you might guess, the number of these partials, their specific tuning relative to one another, and their specific amplitudes are some of the most defining aspects of a sound's timbre, or what is often referred to as tone color. You might also refer to a sound's specific distribution and balance of overtones as its spectrum, or its spectral profile. So these factors are things that make it such that a trumpet sounds different from a clarinet, for example, even if they're both playing the same fundamental pitch. Similarly, it's the same reason that a sawtooth wave sounds different from a square wave. They all have a different distribution and balance of overtones. If you need further proof of this, you can use a tool that's called a spectrogram to visualize a sound's overtone structure. A spectrogram plots time on the x-axis and frequency on the y-axis. By playing multiple different instrument sounds in a row through a spectrogram, you can see that the spectrum of each of them is quite different. Now, you might ask yourself, if all musical sounds can be represented by a series of sine waves, could you use a ton of sine waves to synthesize the sound of other instruments? Or could you use large groups of sine waves to maybe design completely new waveforms? The answer is yes. And this general approach to synthesis is referred to as additive synthesis. Additive synthesis has seldom been explored in hardware instrument design, largely because it requires so many sonic variables. A single sound could require thousands of precisely tuned sine waves with very precise control over their loudness. One relatively practical approach to additive synthesis, though, is called resynthesis. In resynthesis, a specialized process called a Fourier transform is used to analyze a sound's spectrum. The data from that analysis can then be used to define the specific frequencies and amplitudes of a number of oscillators, in effect, recreating the sound. Now, of course, one of the most interesting implications is that that data can also be manipulated. So it becomes possible to use a sound as a starting point and then to manipulate it into something completely new. So all of this is key to how the Spectraphon works. It's an oscillator that derives harmonic content from other sounds. In fact, it's two of these oscillators in a single module. We're going to get into all of that in depth in just a bit. But first, let's take a tour of the panel. Spectraphon is a dual oscillator module that's laid out similarly to a traditional complex oscillator. Each of the two oscillators are essentially identical to one another, and they are internally connected to one another via this central FM bus, allowing high-resolution frequency modulation of either or both oscillators. Aside from some subtle details, the oscillators are identical to one another, so let's hone in on one to get a sense for what it can do. The oscillators each have dedicated sine wave outputs. Additionally, each oscillator has a sub/CV output, which, depending on the selected mode and additional settings, may produce a sub-oscillator or a number of different control voltage signals. We'll talk about that in more detail once we start discussing the different modes of operation. Each oscillator also has odd and even harmonic outputs, and this is where the cool stuff really starts to happen. So these outputs produce the odd and even overtones from the current spectrum. If the even output is unpatched, all overtones are present at the odd output. But by patching the odd and even outputs to different destinations, or by placing them in different places in the stereo field, you can make some really crazy and interesting sounding effects. So let's take a quick listen to that. By the way, I am patching here from the B side of this oscillator, but just remember that both of these sides are more or less identical. The partials control alters the loudness of all of the overtones. When it's turned fully counterclockwise, the odd and even harmonic outputs will be silent. And as you turn it up, it will start to introduce more and more partials, and the sound will get gradually brighter, which sounds somewhat like a filtering effect. Because it can be fully silent, you can modulate the partials control with envelopes or other signals to dynamically change a sound's loudness and timbre in tandem with one another. This is somewhat like a low-pass gate. The slide, focus, and clock controls all function differently in spectral amplitude modulation, or SAM mode, and spectral array oscillation, or SAO modes. But in either mode, they'll have a further effect on the sound's timbre, and they're going to make this cool LED display light up. So here's a quick idea of what they can sound like in SAO mode. The slide, focus, and partials parameters all have control voltage inputs with attenuverters, and the oscillator frequency can be controlled using these coarse and fine frequency tuning knobs. There's also a single volt per octave input per side. Each half of the module also features an input on the top of the panel, as well as a clock input and a shift button toward the bottom. These function differently depending on the selected mode. Looking at the left side, the AFM index can be used to control the amount of frequency modulation from side B to side A. This index has its own CV input with an attenuverter for dynamic FM. Looking at the B side, we have control of the FM index from side A to side B. We still have a CV input for the FM depth, but no attenuverter. When you patch into the CV input here, the B index knob becomes an attenuator for the incoming control voltage. It's important to note that the internal FM only affects the odd and even harmonic outputs. The sine and sub-oscillator outputs are unaffected by these controls. One interesting implication with this is that you can turn up the FM index on both sides at once without breaking into crazy, chaotic cross-modulation. Happily, as you can hear, the FM depth gets deep enough that it does sound crazy all on its own. And if you wanted to cross-modulate stuff, you could always cross-patch into the volt per octave inputs, which also sounds pretty awesome. The button below the B index control can be used to set side B to follow oscillator A's frequency. or to hard sync to oscillator A. When it's set to follow mode, the oscillator B frequency control can be used to dial in a specific tuning ratio between the two oscillators. Subsequent changes to side A's frequency will also then affect side B. The window here above the button lights up green when you've dialed in fairly consonant ratios, and it lights up red for slightly more complex ratios, and otherwise remains unlit for more dissonant intervals. This makes it super easy to dial in specific characters for FM-based patches. So at this point, getting deeper into how the module works means that we need to take a closer look at the difference between SAM, spectral amplitude modulation, and SAO, spectral array oscillation modes. The examples we've looked at so far have primarily used spectral array oscillation mode, in which each half behaves more or less like a typical oscillator. But to really understand how everything works, let's dive into spectral amplitude modulation mode next. In spectral amplitude modulation mode, Spectraphon uses external audio at the A or B inputs in order to amplitude modulate the partials of the oscillator. So in other words, what it's doing is analyzing the spectrum of the incoming sound and then applying that to the spectrum of the oscillator. Okay, so what exactly does that mean? If you apply the incoming sound's harmonic content to the oscillator, doesn't the oscillator just end up sounding exactly the same as the incoming sound? The answer is no, and there are a couple of reasons. First of all, the fundamental pitch of the output is always determined by that oscillator's frequency control. So even if your incoming sound is changing in pitch, the frequency of the oscillator is going to remain the same. Changes in pitch at the input are just going to change which harmonics are accentuated at the odd and even harmonic outputs. It's also important to note that Spectraphon doesn't attempt to detect the fundamental frequency of the sounds at its input. Instead, it always considers sounds at the input to be overtones of a fundamental that you get to dial in using the slide control. The A and B inputs accept both line and modular level signals. So in order to understand what all of this means, let's listen to some voice running through the Spectraphon. To start off here, I've dialed the slide control and the oscillator frequency to both be relatively close to the pitch that I'm going to sing into the microphone. Okay, cool. So now take a listen to what happens when I change the oscillator's frequency. So Spectraphon is analyzing the spectrum of my voice at its input here, and then it is applying that spectrum to this oscillator. And as I change the frequency of the oscillator here, we're hearing that same distribution and balance of overtones being applied to this new frequency. So now let's change the slide control to see how that affects the sound. Notice that as we turn the slide control, the sound remains relatively voice-like, but it shifts the area of harmonic emphasis. Higher harmonics from my voice might suddenly map to lower harmonics on the oscillator, or lower harmonics from my voice might map to higher harmonics on the oscillator. You'll probably notice that this mode sounds a lot like a vocoder, and it's actually conceptually really similar. While vocoders use fixed frequency banks to crudely analyze and remap the spectra of one sound onto another, Spectraphon instead uses a sort of resynthesis to achieve very similar effects. In SAM mode, the attenuators on both the A and B inputs can be thought of as a rough sensitivity control. The focus control also affects the sensitivity to incoming signals, but in a different way. Focus sets the width or sensitivity of each band. This alters the selectivity of the sound generator. You'll notice that when focus is set to higher values, the mapping of the input sound to the output becomes less direct and immediate. Changes in loudness of different overtones at the output will happen more slowly, and the output will tend to ring longer, creating resonator-like or spectral blurring type effects. And of course, you can use this in tandem with the slide control to create all kinds of different sounds. Awesome. So this all sounds great, but of course, voice isn't the only thing that we can use to activate the oscillators. Of course, we can also frequency modulate these sounds using the other oscillator.
(0017 800 2040).
By default, the sub-CV output produces an envelope follower signal in tandem with the input signal. So you can use the loudness of your input signal to modulate anything that you'd like. So for example, here I am using the envelope follower signal to reduce the amount of FM that's applied from the B side to the A side. One more thing worth noting here, by holding either side's shift button and pressing the follow sync CV button, you can switch the CV output to instead produce a stepped random voltage, a smooth random voltage, or a triangle LFO. When producing random voltages or LFO signals, you can use the shift button or the clock input as a tap tempo control. Awesome. Now that we have a sense of how Spectraphon can be used with other live sound sources, let's take a look at how you can capture those sounds for use in spectral array oscillation mode. In spectral array oscillation mode, Spectraphon works somewhat more like a conventional oscillator. The oscillator's wave shape is determined by accessing spectra from internal arrays. But what is an array? When you're in SAM mode, by holding Shift and pressing the SAM/SAO array button, you can create an array by continuously analyzing the incoming sound spectrum. And an array is a collection of 1024 spectra. By default, each of these 1024 spectra are captured about 1 millisecond after one another. Note that the settings of the slide and focus controls are significant in this process of array creation. So let's create an array from this auto harp to see how all of this works. Now that I've created the array, we can switch into SAO mode, and now the slide and focus controls take on new meaning. They become something like coarse and fine controls for accessing the 1024 spectra within the array that we've just created. You can think of slide as a coarse control, while focus acts more like a fine control. In SAO mode, the input level knob can be used to continuously offset the frequencies of the even harmonics up to 1 octave, which can be a really cool way to dial in harmonies or other interesting stereo sounds. The A and B inputs in this mode can be used as FM inputs for the even harmonics, and they're DC coupled, so you can send in any type of signal you'd like to modulate the even harmonics. The clock control and shift button can be used to step sequentially through the spectra in the array. It's also worth noting that if a clock input is connected while you're capturing an array, new spectra will only be added to the array with each incoming clock cycle. So this can be an effective way of capturing the spectra of a more slowly evolving sound. Additionally, in this mode, we no longer have access to an envelope follower at the sub-CV outputs. Instead, you'll have the option for a sub-oscillator tone, stepped random, smooth random, or triangle LFO. The sub-oscillator on side A will produce a saw wave, and the side B sub-oscillator will produce a saturated sine wave. It's also important to note that you can store 16 arrays per side. You determine which array you're using or writing into with a combination of the shift controls and the central array LED display. So let's capture some more arrays. It's important to note that when you're recording arrays, you're not actually recording audio because this isn't a sampler. It's just a way of transferring the spectral information from one sound onto another. That said, I have found that when you capture spectrally dynamic sounds, Spectraphon will maintain a lot of their character. And in that way, you can sort of tell what their original source was.
Can we cruise to the
Country Kicks 104.
So from this point forward, I'm going to share a whole bunch of different patches that feature Spectraphon in a musical context in combination with different instruments. Awesome. So as I'm sure you're able to see, Spectraphon can lend itself to a huge range of musical contexts and sonic characters. It's a surprisingly deep and flexible module that in many ways feels like an entire instrument unto itself. Just a reminder that there is an affiliate link below if you'd like to pick up a Spectraphon for yourself. And anything that you purchase using that link helps to support my channel at no extra cost to you, so that I can continue to make more videos like this one. I honestly feel like Spectraphon is unlike any other Eurorack module that I've ever tried. It's super, super exciting to see concepts from early Buchla designs be carried on and reimagined in these really innovative ways. And it's awesome to see a creative take on additive synthesis and resynthesis. These are all concepts that are personally super inspiring to me, and I'm really excited to be able to experiment with them more easily than I ever have been able to before. So a huge shout out to Make Noise and Tom Erb and Jeff Snyder for this collaboration. I can't wait to see and to hear how this module works its way into other people's musical setups. And I know for sure that it will definitely be getting a lot of use in mine. If you're interested in joining an awesome community of folks who are passionate about things like modular synthesizers and experimental music, or if you're interested in things like unreleased audio and behind the scenes content, then I invite you to join my Patreon community at patreon.com/Sarah Belle Reid. All right, that's it for today. As always, thank you all so much for watching and for listening, and I'll see you next time. This is the end. This is the end of this video. Thank you all for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it. And I'll see you next time in the future for another video. That's all for now. Goodbye.